Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our What's New in FME 2023 webinar. Hope you're all well. We're about to get going. With me this morning, just myself, Kieran Kirk, I'm the Operations Director, and Gavin Park, our CTO, is here as well. Hey, Gavin, how are things?
Morning.
Yeah, everybody seems to be just jumping in now. So we'll just give a second to a few other people joining. So we'll let everybody get online, and then we'll get going now on what's new in FME 2023. There's a lot of new stuff, Gavin. So we're only going to focus on some of the things that you've highlighted, some of the key areas, and also what's coming the 2023.1 release as well. So we're now it's what's good this year's release, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, so we should have chosen all the stuff that's probably going to be useful for people and relevant. So hopefully it's all the key features. There's so much in there in the last couple of releases. So yeah, it's hard picking everything. So we've kind of narrowed it down to the useful bits, or at least the bits we think will be useful to people and that you might miss as well for some of them.
Oh, definitely. Okay. All right. So I think everybody's joined now, so we'll get going. Data is the most critical business asset for any organization. And so with Safe Software, we believe that we serve customers better with data-driven decisions. And the safe differentiators are that deliver value are naturally FME and Safe Software is the geospatial number one for geospatial enterprise integration. So it's a market leader in that environment. The second thing is FME provides a no-code environment that delivers unrivaled productivity. So you can build all these workflows we're going to talk today without having to write a line of code. Now, with more and more with the latest releases of FME, we can deploy it anywhere, wherever you want and however you want to use it. We'll talk a little bit about that later this morning. And Safe Software believe in the restaurant model, which is in that not only do they want to provide an excellent product, but they also want to provide excellent service for post go live and when you're using the system. And finally, now with the move towards enterprise licenses with FME, you get all the system capability you want in the product. So this year we've seen a move away from the old FME database, FME Esri, FME Node Locked to actually just you've got FME Form and you've FME Flow, and they're the products, and you get all the functionality. So Safe Software have been innovators in spatial data since 1993. They bring the power of spatial data to your decision making, and we've all seen that over the years. As I've mentioned now, we have one platform and two technologies. So FME Form allows you to build and run your data workflows. So you're forming your workflows, forming the data pipelines. FME Flow then helps you to automate the flow of these pipelines. And of course, FME Flow hosted is the cloud version of FME Flow. And just to kind of remind people how these product names have changed. So what was FME Desktop is now FME Form. What was FME Server is now, well, I should say FME Flow, but it says Flow there. And what was FME Cloud is now FME Flow hosted. And FME Mobile is still running around there. So on the ecosystem, Safe, as we've mentioned already, have the largest geospatial ecosystem and an unfair advantage in geospatial, which we've always had and delighted to have. With the new releases this year, we've always, with FME, we get new data formats supported every year, and this year is no difference. So we've got Airtable, support for ArcGIS feature server writer, cloud optimized GeoTIFF, Databricks again, really something I've been working with, excellent cloud data warehouse for machine learning, but also for storage, really improving in the last few years. Flat GeoBuff, I think we talked about before at our data conference. Generative AI reader again. Gavin will talk a little bit about that today. Microsoft Azure Synapse SQL, again another cloud data warehouse. ND-JSON and ND-GeoJSON. Precisely MRR writer. Revit writer again. Gavin will talk briefly on that. Trimble Connect for some more new mobile, and hundreds of new items on the FME hub and countless updates across the system. So again, FME just has unrivaled connectivity, supporting all modern platforms and modern formats. Right, Gavin, I'll hand over to you now, and you can actually go through some of the key new features that are coming this year.
So hopefully you can see that screen.
Yes. Yeah.
Brilliant. So one of the new ones that is out is there's also GeoParquet now. So we've talked a little bit in the past about Parquet. What it really is and why this is quite a good one is that it's a replacement for things like CSV. So CSV has been really, really popular for decades. It's probably one of the most common data formats you can use. But as you get into big data, it just doesn't perform as well. It's quite verbose. It can take a lot of time to actually process a lot of data. So, it's fine for hundreds of thousands, a couple of million records. But as you start to move up into much, much bigger data sets, it's not so efficient. So the Open Apache Consortium have come up with Parquet, which FME supported for a while, and they've recently extended that to include a geospatial element so that you can store geospatial in there as well. So we can now bring that data in. One of the real big benefits for this, and just one of the reasons for calling it out, is that you can see the performance difference there. So we're reading about 4.5 million records in from traditional CSV file. It's taking about 25 seconds. It's using a reasonably decent amount of CPU system time there to bring that data in. Same data set in the Parquet format. In fact, this one's the GeoParquet, so it's got the points as well alongside this. We can read that into FME in 1.4 seconds, so it's a big performance game. And again, as we scale this up to tens of millions of features, you're going to really start to notice that performance coming in as well. So if you're looking at big data, you're struggling a little bit with CSV, this is definitely one to have a look at as we go through. The other one, just to call out, FME's had good Revit reader support. They've just released the ability to write Revit files now. So if you're in that kind of civils construction space, you're looking at using a lot of data from Autodesk, bringing it in from their cloud, and you actually want to start to output some of these Revit files, we've got that option there. It's a little bit of a work in progress, so it's not everything that the Revit output format will support. The idea is really that you can start to slim your models down. So if there are functions in here that are missing that you want, do let SAFE know, because they're really keen to kind of know which bits to focus on as they develop the writer more going forward. So it's pretty rich so far, but there's definitely some room for some extra bits. So if there's some bits you think are missing, just let us know and we can pass that on to SAFE, because they're quite keen for that user feedback for these ones. And then there's a few new transformers that have kind of snuck in over the last release. So if you've got 2023, 2023.1, there's a few new transformers that have come in that you possibly won't notice, but actually some of them are really useful. So there's a new unique identifier generator transformer that lets you generate UUIDs or GUIDs. So if you've created these previously using either of those individual transformers, they've now been combined in this new combination transformer here. It also brings in the universally unique lexicology graph sortable identifier, which is more than a mouthful, which is again just another way of creating unique identifiers. So if you do need to generate unique IDs for your data, you need to join things through as part of a workflow, this is a really good, robust method for doing that. The other one that I quite like is the date time rounder, mostly because FME always uses fractional seconds. So if you're generating a lot of timestamps with FME, it's always putting them out as fractional seconds, which is always slightly annoying because you don't really probably need to measure to quite that level of precision with most things. So this just gives us that ability to round up timestamps quickly and easily without a lot of hassle to the nearest hour, the nearest minute, the nearest second, etc. We can also do it on intervals. So we can actually say it's every 4-hour blocks, for example. This also means that if we're starting to do more analytics on real-time data, we can actually start to round up our data to group it together a little bit more. So we've just got a really simple example here that you can see is basically just a flight path. I picked something off Flight 24, pulled their flight path data down. So we've got individual timestamps, at every few seconds coming through. But if I wanted to do some analytics on that kind of real-time data, that's not really great. So I just threw it through the datetime rounder, and you can see that I've broken this down by an hourly process through. So it's about 10 hours, I think it takes to go through. But you can see now when we've started to build the stats, you can see obviously our T01, the aircraft sat on the ground, it's probably taxiing, it's only moving at about 12 knots, so it's not really quick. But obviously, as you move through those timestamps, we can start to see we've got the times for the altitudes, the speed, as it actually goes through different parts of the flight, and obviously then coming into that landing profile. So if you're looking at tracking vehicle information, you're looking at tracking sensor information coming in from smart devices, IoT devices, we can bring that in. We can use that same sort of concept and say, what was the average temperature for these particular timestamps? What was the average flow load on this particular part of our network within these kind of hourly times? So, it's got a few uses and it's kind of quietly snuck in, but actually with a lot of this real-time information, it's got a lot of power behind that. I could have aggregated that into larger chunks as well, rather than just hourly. I could have gone for 4 hourly windows to really break that data down. So from an analytics point of view, and actually helping to, manage the data flow that comes in from IoT, it's always referred to as a fire hose of data. It's a really helpful transformer for actually starting to manage some of those processes. And the other one I really like, and I've missed for many a year in FME, is this new classifier transformer. So what it will let you do is classify your numeric data by natural breaks, your quantiles, or your equal intervals, and actually then assign that to a different class number. So if you're familiar with GIS, you've probably looked at this in the likes of QGIS, in the likes of Esri, and it's just standard out-of-the-box stuff. It's never really been in FME as an out-of-the-box capability. You always had to kind of build this yourself to do it. So this is a really nice transformer for actually helping to start to classify your data. So again, if you're looking at reporting, wanting to output your data to a more visual kind of profile, it's a really handy way of just building these classes directly into your data flows now, without any real hassle. So we can take things like the quantile data. I took our crime data set, that's that 4.5 million records, classified it into 4 groups. So we can see basically which are the red, which are the top level or higher crime counties versus down to green for the lower crime counties. And obviously then we can start to render that up in our map as our output as you go through. So really helpful, just as a nice quick win and kind of snuck in, but it's a really powerful transformer for helping with these sorts of things as we go through.
How does it break them up, Gavin? Is it the number of classes? Is it just take an equal range, or is there more settings to it than that?
So it depends on the option you choose. So equal intervals is literally just saying, well, I'm going to take 0 to 10, 10 to 20, 10 to 30. Doesn't really reflect your data, or doesn't stretch your data. Quantile is, if I remember this correctly, it's the top 25%, then the next 25%, the middle, and then the bottom 25%. So it naturally breaks your data. And natural breaks, I think, is an algorithm that tries to find natural breakpoints within your data set.
Yeah, I've used some of them similar in G Media, but I was wondering how it's a very simple looking dialogue. So I was wondering how they were breaking it. So it's, those 3 options there: the natural breaks, the quantile, or equal intervals. Then that sets up your ranges. Okay, very good.
Yeah, so I know there's standard ones and it's maths, and that's never been my strong point. So I just accepted it works and goes through.
Okay.
With things like the equal intervals, you do have the number of classes, so you can choose your number. So it is very much like if you picked up QGIS, it's basically the same kind of settings you'd see there, or Esri, Geomedia, and things as you go through.
So definitely, cool.
And I say one of the big things that Safe are pushing for, and I think it's something we're going to see a lot more of, is just making you more productive in FME and making it easier to use the product, to make you faster to get through processes, so that you're battling FME really to do something quite simple, to make it easier. One of the big new ones that's come out, and is going to be a little bit controversial, I think, for some people, is the new AI assistant. So everybody's talking about AI. This is the big thing for this year. It'll be the big buzzword. And you've probably seen things like Microsoft are releasing Copilot to sit alongside you when you're working. So Safe are doing the same thing with FME, so we can now embed some of this AI technology in. I must admit, I was a little skeptical when they first announced it, but having played around with a few of these, it's actually really good. So with this one here, I've got air codes in my data set, which is fine, but I'm never really sure if those air codes are valid or not. So I can come in, within the tester, I can actually create a test that says, check if my error code is valid using regular expressions. Now, if anybody's ever used these, they'll know that they are an absolute nightmare to create. But they've now put in an AI assistant. So I can literally come in and go, not really sure what I want to do. But if I explain to the AI what I want my regular expression to do, it will go off and actually generate me the regular expression that I need. So it basically just saves a bunch of Googling. So it's really kind of almost as though you're embedding your Google prompt within FME to go through. I can just put that in, generate. It's going to give me a warning because it is going to send some information to a third party. So again, from a data protection point of view, you're going to want to think a little bit about what you're doing where you're sending that information. But you can see there it's generated the regular expression. It's given me some test examples, and it also gives me a bit of an explanation, which is quite nice because otherwise it's basically just voodoo looking at those numbers. I have no idea. So I can apply them in, click OK. I've got my regular expression now. If I run my tester, it's going to quickly test my data set. And it's going to come through, and I can see that I've got 79 records there that don't actually meet the kind of error code standard or specification to go through. So it's really, really useful.
That's very cool. And is that across many features? Is that across that AI assist? Is it just on a certain ones like the regex, or how does it work?
On the kind of more developer-y ones currently. So it's built into the regular expressions one, which I think is probably the one most people find most useful because they are just complicated at times, and to be able to put them in, it's really helpful. It's also in the SQL assistant. So again, if you're like me, who vaguely remembers how to write a SQL query, but I always have to go and double check because I'm never 100% sure.
Yeah.
I can come in, I can write what I want my SQL query to be. And again, it's just be mindful that you can send the database schema to the AI, but you are sending that to a third party. It's basically the OpenAI consortium, so it's the same as ChatGPT. Obviously, it's a little bit of a black box. So, you may want to be thinking, well, actually, is there anything sensitive in my schema? Do I want to use that? And, you can choose that accordingly as you go through. So if it's unticked, which it is by default, it doesn't send anything to ChatGPT or OpenAI. If you tick it, it will send the schema and things along to the background for you. So, if your schema is not particularly sensitive, it's open data, or it's just very generic, that'll give you a slightly more accurate answer. You can see here, though, with this AI one, I've got, select table 1, table 2. I've got a description again down the bottom so I can understand what it's trying to do. And, I can obviously substitute these in for my own table names as I go through. So you can make it a little quicker by submitting the schema, but obviously it's just a little bit more sensitive. So you can choose. And again, you can up and down vote it. So if you think the answer was really good, you can give it a thumbs up, which is helping Safe understand which answers were good, bad. If it was absolute rubbish, which it will give you sometimes, you can give it a thumbs down based on that. I think it's like all of the AI things, it's down to how good your prompt is. So if you write a good prompt, it will give you a good answer back as you come through. And then the other one that it's in is the Python callers or the Python creator. And this one actually has a few more modes. So in this case, we can get it to generate code for us based on the description. We can get it to refine our code. But the one I quite like is the explain code. So if I find a bunch of Python code, which I actually did in the workspace, well, we're pulling together. Somebody had created it. They'd put a whole bunch of Python into a workflow. We were looking, going, well, what do all these Python bits do? I can actually now run it through the AI. And again, it's going to explain what that code's actually doing for me. So it's a quick way of actually helping you understand, maybe a bit of code that you found in a workspace that somebody's created. You're not really sure what it's doing. I can quickly get that explanation through. I can also add comments. So, if you're like most of our developers, they hate putting comments against stuff. Again, you can run that through and it'll add in some comments for you as you go through. So it's really powerful. It's probably very much early days. It is still in that kind of tech preview stage. So they are ironing out all the bugs, the issues and things. So if you come across problems, again, always let us know. But I think it's going to be quite an exciting area because where AI really does start to add value is in these sorts of things, but how does it make you more productive? How can we actually start to solve some of our challenges a little bit quicker rather than, Googling and then having to find the first answer off Stack Overflow or something and then looking that up. Now it's all embedded, so it's going to save you time. You can also start to access all the OpenAI transformers. So there are some actual packages that let you access OpenAPI or OpenAI, or basically ChatGPT, directly. You can also access the Microsoft implementation of it as well. So if you're more of a Microsoft house, you can go direct to Microsoft and use them. And you can start to put in a ChatGPT connector. You can do image generation. We've got this completions connector as well. So that one always escapes me what it actually does, but I think it helps you complete existing content that you've got through. And there's also a reader, so you can use it straight from a AI prompt here as part of a workflow. So I was really bored. One of our users is quite into Power Automate, so I just got it to basically set up a rap battle between FME Form and Power Automate, and it will spit you out all of your content. As I say, your usage for this may vary in terms of how valuable it's going to be. Certainly things like processing addresses. If you wanted to pull an air code out, for example, or pull out address information, again, you can start to use the GPT connectors to do that, to actually help pull out that information. And it's really successful on those sorts of things. The only thing to call out is obviously this is an API, so there are some costs associated with this. So, it's going to be very low cost to do 10, 20 addresses. If you put 1 million addresses in there, you'll obviously want to think a little bit about your spending and whose credit card it is. The other really interesting one that's come in, it's a little more niche, is the HTTP call has now been expanded to import Open API specifications. So this is different from Open AI. So Open API is about, if you have a web service, defining what that web service looks like in an open standards way so that other systems can easily integrate from it. So we can import that API specification and then start to access all the methods and things within the HTTP caller. And I think this is laying the groundwork for some interesting stuff that's going to come in 2024 with SAFe. So we have Map Enterprise from Hexagon that has a rich API that we can use. So I actually created this one, or pulled this one in from it. It has a YAML file that it gives you, which is basically just its description file. So we can now import this, bring this into FME, and it will give me every single method for post operations, put operations, get operations, and things. So we were looking at some imagery work. So I can just come in here now, find that imagery API, and it sets it all up. So I'm not scrabbling around with documentation, trying to work out what's there, remembering which bit goes where. I can quickly come in. We've put some security things in as well for it. But essentially, all that API information is there available. And if I need to quickly interact with one, this is a really, really useful tool. And I think more and more systems are API based these days. More and more users are trying to access API information. So if you can get that open API definition, it makes putting those APIs into FME so much easier when we're going through. So this is going to be quite a useful one. A little bit more niche. It's kind of hidden away there, but it's definitely worth remembering. And then the other big one that's come in, at least 2023 is giving it a refresh, is comparing workspaces. We've had a couple of the guys recently working on projects. They found this really useful to see what they thought the workspace was going to be versus maybe that somebody else has gone in and started tinkering with it, especially if you're working with customers. They may have made some changes. They could quickly do a side-by-side comparison on this and say, oh, actually, this is exactly what we've got here. So you can come in here and see like the spatial filter. It's a little bit blurry here, but you can see the settings are being flagged up for being changed. If we've got new readers, so we have a new reader just off to the right here that's replaced these two data inspectors. So it'll break down in a really granular detail all of the differences between them now. So it's really, really useful. If you've played with this in some of the earlier releases, it was a little clunky. It's probably the nicest way I can put it. I always struggled to kind of use it a little bit. It wasn't the most user-friendly. SAFe have taken that feedback on board and they've given it a real refresh for 2023. So it's much nicer to use. And actually, this is going to be really, really useful, I think, in a lot of use cases, because it's really easy to lose track of which version is which. This lets us compare the two, see what the differences are. And we can push changes from one of these workflows into the other workflow as well. So makes it really, really powerful.
Really improves that DevOps experience, Gavin, doesn't it? Because that you can have multiple people working on flow lines and versions and everything, and not having to figure out which version's in production, which was in test, and the GitHub integration as well. So that's very, very cool.
Yeah, and it's so easy to get them confused. Or if you're like me, I end up with 5 different versions of the workspace I've saved into different parts of my desktop or into my downloads folder, etc. So now I can go, oh, okay, compare the two of them. This is where the differences are. So you can quickly see, we've got 15 changes between the two workflows. What's on one side of the reader? So you can see we've got the AutoCAD's been added in on the right-hand side there. It's not present on the left-hand side. So that's for the writer that's come through. We can see the transformers, the user parameters in there have been changed. We can break down that. Even things like the connection paths, we can come through and see there as well. So an awful lot of content. It's a little bit intimidating because it is so fine-grained, but you can turn off what you're interested in. So we can see there we've got the two differences between the settings for the spatial filter. So under the controls there, I can go in and say, well, actually, I'm only interested in looking at the transformers that have changed, the writers that have changed, etc. as you go through. And if you want to bring a change across, if I wanted to bring that inspector through, I can just click on that there. It's going to just say, do I want to replicate it as a confirmation? And it moves that over and recompares it. I also then have to reconnect it, or I can actually bring through the connection path. So it does treat the two separately. So it's something just to bear in mind. And again, it's just going to go through that same process and does the recompare. So again, we can just bring those in and it will update kind of the diff file essentially as we go through. So I think it's going to be a really helpful one as users get to that version to start to understand what is going on. And then the big one that's probably going to be a little more niche is that there is finally Git integration directly from the command line. So this is a little interesting, and it's definitely one that if you use Git, you're going to love. And if you have no idea what Git is, you're going to be a little bit kind of like, oh, what's the point? But it's basically just letting you do version control directly, which is very much into that whole kind of continuous integration process. So we can come in, we can use the command line to look at that. I can check out a new branch. So basically I can say, well, I want to work on this workspace, but I only want to make some edits to it. So I can come in, I can check that out directly from command line. I can go into FME. I can make my changes. And you could do this from the desktop tool. It doesn't have to be directly from command line, but there's a couple of extra tweaks they've added in that do make this a little bit more interesting going through. So if I'm just going to add my inspector. And then what I can also start to do is I can do all the differencing as well. So that kind of traditional diff that you would see when you commit back as part of a Git-based workflow, it will show you that before and after, actually against your repository. I can now do that directly from command line and again, launch FME, and it will give us back that Git compare view that we were kind of just looking at previously. So the compare tool is nice and easy. Anybody can really use that one. That's kind of designed for the mass user. This command line version is much more based around you having more of a Git-based workflow for more of a development approach. So if you are using these sorts of tools, then this just means you can easily integrate FME into that kind of workflow now. Makes it much more simple to build in. But I say, if you're not somebody who uses Git in a lot of detail like that, don't panic. The compare tool is much simpler and is probably your go-to. But I say this has been the top most asked thing in F4 and FME for the last 5 or 6 years, I think. So they're finally adding it in. It's a little tricky to set up. So again, if you're interested in doing it, you've got questions, again, always just reach out to us to go through. And then just on Flow, this one I actually really like. It's been something I've been wanting for a long, long time. It's really simple, but in the automations, you can now see how many messages have been passed between the different components. So if you think of desktop, you can see the number of features flowing through, exactly the same thing, but just for the automations and stuff going. So just gives you a little bit more information about what's flowing around, how many features have flown through your workflow and things. So really, really simple, but I think that's going to actually be quite a helpful one for people to see and use. And then just back to desktop, the feature information window's just been rejigged. So one of the things I think has always been a bit confusing for users is this concept of exposed and unexposed attributes. So unexposed attributes are maybe you've connected to a web service, or we've got a list element here for the OpenSky one, and it brings in data, but they're not actually defined as attributes on the canvas. So therefore, they've got FME terms as unexposed ones. And they would all kind of get mixed up in the feature information window. It wasn't obvious to see where they'd come from. They've rejigged it now just to make it a little more obvious. So you can see these are the attributes that you would see on the canvas, but these are also attributes that your feature has, but aren't exposed on the canvas. So you can see that all these unexposed ones in here. So it's just making it a little bit more clear about what's going on and what sits where within that workflow to make it easier. So again, it's quite a minor one, but I think it's just going to make life a little easier for people, especially if you're starting to learn FME. And see what's going on. They've also slightly rejigged things like the geometry. You'll notice some of the information is now down the bottom where it traditionally would have been at the top. So they're kind of prioritizing the attributes, which is what most people are generally interested in, and then bringing all the sort of geometry elements combined down to the bottom there as you go through. So it's a slight tweak, but I say it's going to make life a lot easier, I think, for a lot of people. And then one big new one you may have come across if you're using an older version of FME recently is the Stamen maps that have kind of been the staple background map for a lot of users who haven't wanted to use the Esri maps or a map box kind of base layer. Has been switched off essentially. The company hosting those tiles no longer wants to do it, but they have teamed up with another company. So that's caused obviously Safe a bit of a problem, because if you're using those maps currently in any version earlier than 2023.1, you're not going to be able to access them. They are going to disappear. You'll see a bunch of error messages coming up on the tiles themselves saying, I think it was the end of October they were lasting to, so you'll probably see them phase out now. So what Safe have done is they've actually added in their own default base maps based off of the new company who's providing them. So they've also added them in as default. So no longer do you have to go through and set these up manually. You can now actually just pick default light, default dark, or default terrain, which is that one on the right-hand side there, and they're just out the box. So again, it's going to make it much easier just to get a quick base map in if you need it. If you've done a new install, you just want to set a base map on, you can quickly just pick one of these default options now in 2023.1. You can still add all of your Esri maps, your Bing maps, your Mapbox, WMS, WMTS services in there if you want to, just as you would have done before. It just means we've got some nice kind of out-the-box ones we can use without having to mess around. So again, if you start to see some error message, if you're using that free kind of base map, that's the reason why. So unfortunately, you will have to upgrade or find an alternative base map. But if you're up to 2023.1, you're good to go. Let's say the other part is about accelerating project delivery, to make you faster as you're going through. So one of the nice new things that's in 2023 is if you're using projects, you can now actually see what that project content is. So, if maybe we've created something for you, we're sharing that with you. When you import it onto your system, you'll now get a nice breakdown of all of the components that actually make up that project. So again, you can step through, see, is it a new user that's coming in, is a new repository, maybe a new token. So again, it's quite a simple one, but it was always a bit of a black box operation, never really sure what you were going to import. So this just gives you a lot more granularity about what's there. There's also a new package developer SDK, and this comes into the fact there's a lot more APIs out there now that you might want to use. So we can actually start to create our own transformers in FME. So we've created this simple one here. You'll see that when you add it, it comes up now as an FME transformer. It does get flagged as a community transformer, so you can differentiate them a little bit. But it just means if you've got a particular burning desire to work with an API, and you're working with the API a lot, or there's certain blocks of functionality you want to use, you can now create your own package. So you'll have seen these with some of the transformers like the emailer that Safe have released. They're opening up this program a little bit wider. So again, if this is something you're interested in, it's definitely worth reaching out to us, because it's possibly something that we can build for you as a service. Rather than you having to learn some of the intricacies that sit behind it. It's a little bit more complex than, say, a traditional custom transformer. But, if you've got a particular API that you're on to interact with, you want to make it really simple, this is a perfect option for that. So we've just been building a test weather service one here. So you can see now we can put an API key in, we've got the coordinate system. So all those parameters that your API would traditionally take, we can make these as parameters in the transformer. So it's very, very easy to interact with. And it's really extending that concept of the Esri online connector, the SharePoint online connector, the Autodesk online connector, etc. The email transformer. It's a nice simple wrapper onto more complex APIs. There's a new transformer UI builder, and there's Python code sits behind this. So this is where this moves into more of a developer territory for producing them. So these aren't, something you can quickly build. There's a little bit of effort creating them, but it's a really new or useful tool. So I can say, if it's something that you're battling with certain APIs and you think actually it'd be really good to have a transformer that would take care of this, say reach out to us and say there's something as service that we can help you guys build that through and deliver that. There's also some enhancements to the quick search, really just to reflect some of these changes that are coming through. So you'll see that we've got transformers now marked as official. So you can quickly see if a transformer is an official safe one, for example, how many times that transformer has been downloaded for some of these custom transformers. So you can see if it's a really popular one, or if it's maybe one that's nobody really uses, if it's installed. And you can also then see community ones. So these are the ones that the community have built and have deployed up onto the FME hub. So you can say, okay, well, actually, maybe I'm going to trust the one from Safe as being a fairly authoritative transformer. This one here, I have no idea who Jamie Gillis is. I don't know if his work's really good, if it's really poor. I might do a little bit more testing around that to make sure that's going to be valid for what I want. Now, I'm assuming 246 people have found this transformer quite useful. So therefore, it's probably a case of, oh, actually, that's probably fairly robust, or at least it's a popular concept. So again, trust that one maybe a little bit more than maybe that's got 2 or 3 downloads, is a bit more niche. And one of the other big things that's come in around this continuous integration and sort of more of this DevOps space is deployment parameters. And I think these are ones that are going to take people a little bit of time to get their heads around, but I think people are going to really like. So the idea is that if you're creating a workspace that needs to run on FME Flow, you're going to have a bunch of deployment parameters. It might be database connections, for example, web service connections, parameter information that you really want to standardize and put somewhere central. So what we can do now is put those parameters up into FME Flow or FME Server, and then we can bring those down. So when we're authoring a workspace, we can actually connect to them. So if I've got my production workflow or my DevOps workflow or my test connection for different databases, I can set all those up on the server. And then when I'm building my workflow, I can make sure I'm connecting to those parameters so that I'm going to have consistency between the experience on FME Flow and the experience on FME Desktop. Naming conventions are going to stay the same. Everything's going to be more consistent. So it's going to make moving between different environments much, much easier. So as people get more and more into this kind of deployment infrastructure as code type environments, this is all the kind of things that are really going to help leverage some of those capabilities. So what you'll see from the deployment parameters is we end up with this new little section here, if there are any that have been set up on your system. And I can start to link these through. So I've got things like I've set one up for the notifications for email, the host name, the port name, so that if I need to reference those anywhere in my workflow, I'm not having to recreate them each time. I can standardize on those, link them in, and make sure I've got those settings for maybe my prod environment or my test environment or my production environment. And again, I can create local overrides for testing. So if you've ever used the FME Flow parameters when you're creating workspaces, and if we've been talking about using things like the shared resource data folder in a workflow, again, you'll be familiar with that, being able to override the setting to put that as a local development environment as we run through. So same sort of concept, just extended out with more consistency as it runs in. Also means they refreshed some of the FME connection details as well, which is actually quite nice. They've simplified the kind of wizard for connecting to FME now. So if you're used to connecting to FME Flow, FME Server, you'll be familiar with the, I can click on the icon here to create and publish a workspace, to download a workspace. You'll now see we've also got this list of connections. And if that connection's active, you'll get this nice little green logo. So I can click on here and choose, my different environments that I've got. that I want to connect to. So again, I might want to connect to my production environment, my test environment, and then FME knows which one it's connected to. Those deployment parameters will also reflect that environment. Again, you'll see this big green in that case. If it's red, it means it can't connect to them, so there's no connection there as you run through. But also, once I do want to publish, I've got a nice simple interface now, so I can come in, I can choose quickly which connection I want, and it's going to show me my repository. So it's just minimizing the number of clicks to get through parts of this workflow. So again, quite a small change, but just is actually a really nice user experience. It just saves you having to click through a lot of things that probably weren't very relevant initially. So it's much faster to use. So I really like this one. It's quite painful to go back to some of the older versions where it's not in there. So it's just really those little usability tweaks and making you faster at doing these things. The other one that's come in on the sort of parameter side is conditional parameters. So what that means is when we select parameters for maybe an FME server app, or FME Flow app rather, or in a workspace or in a transformer, I can make them conditional. So in this case, I've got my geometry required. If I'm selecting yes, I can show spatial formats. So if I come in here, just as a practical example, I can say, is my geometry required? Yes, and I'm going to get options around what spatial format do I want, what coordinate reference system do I want coming in here, and I can choose those. If I say, well, actually, I'm not really interested in the geometry, I don't care about this whole geo stuff, I can give that a whole different list. So I can start to tailor my parameters for the sorts of questions that I'm asking or for the sorts of users that I'm targeting. And all it really means is I can set all these up in the parameter manager, and I now have this new conditional visibility. And I can say that if the domain one is set to yes, then hide the spatial formats or show the spatial formats. If I've got my non-spatial one, that's going to be the domain set to no. And you can build this out to be as complex as you want as you go through and start to build these out. So it's going to make this much more user-friendly. It's going to be a little bit more like if you're used to using Survey 123 and you've got the conditional parameters there, it's going to be a lot more closer to that kind of user experience. What's not in yet, but it should hopefully, touch wood, be in 2024, is making these lists dynamic as well. So they're able to pull in from a service to make the list adaptive. So rather than it being static, that should hopefully be coming in as well next year. So the parameters are going to be much, much richer. The whole user experience for building server apps and the flow apps is going to get a lot better, I think, with these and some of the changes that are coming forward. So again, it's going to make building your workspace, serving this out to your end users so much easier.
That is excellent, isn't it? That's for those data entry forms. That's going to be really powerful, isn't it, Gavin?
Yeah, to be able to select them. That's a little bit of work setting them all up, but once you've built them, that's going to give you that consistent user experience from desktop through to the flow apps and stuff on server. So yeah,
and again, no code.
Yeah, absolutely no programming. It's literally just come in, choose them, all just clicking through in the user interface. And then the other one that's come through that's going to be probably quite useful, I think, for a lot of people, that maybe take a little time just for you to get your head around, is the Attribute Manager now lets you define data types. Again, this has been something a lot of people have wanted for a long time. And it basically means that within the Attribute Manager, I can now create a defined schema. So previously, FME just didn't really care too much about the data type of the data that was flowing through the process. It was always kind of saw it in a fairly generic data type. And it was only when you got to the writer, you would start to define what you wanted it to look like as you were going through. We can now come in and actually say that I want my name to be varchar 200 or I want my name to be varchar 20. So you'll be able to see as part of your workflow that if you change this to varchar 20, I'm going to truncate my data, nice and early on in your workflow process. It's not going to be that last bit where you suddenly, everything's working perfectly. You go to run it to the database and suddenly find that you've got the wrong data type for the particular format that you're looking for or field that you're targeting. You can now start to catch some of these a little bit earlier. So it also means that from building the schema, I can make my feature writers a little bit easier. So I've got geodirectory here. I've joined up 3 different tables. So I've got a whole host of attributes. I can now use the Attribute Manager to actually manage that schema. So it makes my whole schema management process much, much simpler. I can get rid of attributes. I can create new ones. I can define what I want that data type to be. I can import that from an existing feature cache. I can rename stuff. But now when I come to the feature writer, because I've set everything up, I don't have to recreate it here. I can just click on automatic. FME will pick up that definition that I've defined in the attribute manager and then use that as actually part of that feature writer definition. So I'm not having to go into the feature writer, spend ages creating it all there. I can do it in the attribute managers as I need to, and I can build that anywhere within the workflow. So I can set up, new attributes that I'm creating. I can already set them to be the right data type so that when they arrive at the writer, everything's correctly set up. So again, it's something that's quite simple, but actually is going to be really, really powerful, and it's going to save quite a bit of time messing around with worrying about, do I have the right data sizes, the right schemas and things going through. So it's a small tweak to the attribute manager, but really, really powerful one as it's there. And then we've also got options to deploy everywhere. So I shall let Kieran explain this one.
All right. Tell me to share screen there, Gavin. Yeah. I'll just give you a break from presenting. Yeah. Share, and I'll flick to this.
So I think this
Okay.
one's going to be a really powerful one as well, about helping users use the data more efficiently.
No, 100%. Yeah. So as we know, today the data is larger, faster, more varied, and more distributed than ever before. So yeah, we're going to have data on premise. We're going to have data in hybrid clouds, various clouds, and and even when it's very simple to talk about the cloud being, this one place, but actually when at the end of the day, the cloud is just data centers somewhere, and in some cases, most of them are in Ireland. But you've got data centers; they have to physically reside somewhere. So with data, there's a need now to have increased efficiency so that you can process your data wherever it resides and eliminate that network latency and data transfer, and then being able to deploy your processing so that your processing resides where your data is, so you're meeting your data residency rules. And again, data security and data compliance is so much more important. So with FME remote engines, you can actually deploy the FME process in the region you need beside the data. So again, as I mentioned, with the cloud, it is just data centers somewhere in the world, or they are physically residing somewhere. And if you have your data pipeline in one location and your data storage in another, you're going to get this data latency. You're going to get these data delays. So you need an efficient way to have your processing and your data in the same location, in the same area, and running through the same security. So with the deploy to any or remote engines from FME now, you can have engines on premise with your data, and you can have the remote engine service inside your clouds or wherever they are in things like Azure, or working with Esri, or whatever it is you want to be able to work with. Also things like Snowflake. So bringing these engines close to the data to ensure the optimum performance of your data pipelines. Also, just to keep things moving as well, Sisense, with this kind of distributed deploy anywhere architecture, now you can control all the licensing from FME Flow. Again, means it easier to deploy your distributed processing as opposed to licensing each engine separately, and it's disposable, and transient processing can happen where you need it. From a performance point of view, we have the aggregator now has gone for some data from 1 hour to just over 6 minutes. The area overlayer is 2 times faster, and even seen examples where it's 70 times faster. Surface clipping, again, examples with a large candidate mesh, that's 110 times faster, and 3x performance improvement, or up to 55 for raster clipping. So again, say if I have an ongoing need in every release to improve performance and speed things up, which is really useful. And again, clipper curve area clipping 17 times faster, and clipper area clipping, yeah, you can see the numbers. We're running a bit late, so I'll speed up a wee bit. So that brings us to our end and to our questions. I'll stop sharing for a second. We do have a couple of questions there, Gavin. If you can, I'll read them out to you. I tried to answer one, but I probably wrong, so I'll make sure I was given. So we were asked, can the Parquet reader actually point to a CSV file? And I was saying no, we would point FME to the CSV and it would write the Parquet. Is that
That's
correct?
right.
Yeah.
So with the Parquet ones, it's a format in its own right. So it's just the same as any other reader. It's more performant than the CSV. So it's kind of replacement for CSV files in general. So actually those Parquet files I created, I took the source CSV because there's 600 megabytes of CSV files, there's about 4.5 million record features. And I just converted that CSV into the Parquet because it was going to be quicker to work with in the rest of my workflow. So I did that as a conversion. So we can create those new Parquet files. So again, if you're doing big data and you need to push that into other systems, so if you wanted to load it into Snowflake, for example, into things like Sisense, we can bring that data in more efficiently now using those Parquet formats. So it's an alternative to CSV, but obviously you can turn your CSVs into your Parquets rather than having the Parquet point at the CSV.
Great. And then another question is from Dara. What do the tokens relate to on AI Assist? I'm assuming it's something to do with the licensing, is it?
Yeah, so it's back to backing the way the OpenAI API works. So the tokens are basically how many characters you put in, because the length of your query determines how much work they have to do on the back end. So that's kind of how they license it. So those tokens are based on basically how long your string is. Now, you as a user in the safe provided AI don't really need to worry too much about that. It just sits there as part of the system and it will run. So you can make your query, long or as complex as you need it to be. But if you start to use your own open API transformers, it's just something to bear in mind. If you're using your own account, for example, there's also the OpenAI connector will also talk to the different ChatGPT models. And there are some cheaper models and there are some more expensive. So ChatGPT 4, I think, is more expensive than ChatGPT 3. And there's a turbo version that's quicker, that again uses less credits because on the back end it's doing less processing to generate you your answer. So again, you can scale that to what you think is appropriate. But yeah, with the FME ones, it's really just about how long your string is and how expensive that query would be to run on the back end. But yeah, you don't need to worry as a user currently in the product.
Great stuff. Okay, I think we're and I will see if any other questions come in. But in the meantime, we'll start to wrap up. Today, Gavin, just let everybody know your webinar out. You're supporting another webinar this evening with our friends in Safe Software.
That's right.
With Dublin City Council, talking about the forms and the homes inspection app. Isn't that right? At was it 4 o'clock?
That's it. Yeah, 4 o'clock our time. So yeah, and it's still up on SAFE's website. So if you want to attend and you haven't, you can register on there. And it's going through how we're using FME Flow with sort of no-code apps. So how we can deliver the apps to actually out to users, both as the kind of inbuilt ones, but also how you can extend it and use FME as web service provider to actually drive a lot of your own applications as well. So it's quite a successful one we've had with DCC rolling out their Fix-It platform.
Definitely, and that'd be really good, and yeah, great to have it. I'm just having a quick look here to see. They don't have it under upcoming, maybe because it's today. I can't see it, but we might see if we can throw it into the link. Was recorded. Yeah, no, it's not there. So we might see if we can throw it into the link to people afterwards, and just ourselves then as well. We've been having a good lot of webinars this year. I hope you've all enjoyed it. We've had great attendance. We have one more. So this time next month on the 6th of December, we're going to have our Sisense, which is our BI platform, its top features of 2023. So very similar to today. I think it's myself and Connor are going to do in that one. Yes, there will be the inevitable ChatGPT references as well, because they've built some stuff into their system as well in the analytics to be able to push data out to the LLM and bring information in. But actually say that the Slick and the FME integration there is pretty slick now. It's very good. Okay, and the chat, I think. Oh yeah, thank you, Tanya. She put the link in for the no code app webinar this evening, so that's great. If you want to register for that, here, Gavin and Garrett and Mark from Dublin City and Don from Say Software. So I think hopefully it should be a really interesting webinar. So Gavin, thank you for all your hard work today, putting all that together. I took the easy route and just did the start and the end. But some really cool features, guys. I think you will understand. I think you will appreciate Safe are really driving on and really meeting that low code or no code drive for an ETL and data management platform. So it's really good. So again, thank everybody for coming this morning and giving us your time. If you have any other questions, please reach out to us. And thank Tanya for arranging everything in the background. Thanks, Gavin. All right. We'll see you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.